I got the mini, and it's in my bathroom now. And so, like, my apartment is long enough that I couldn't hear my HomePod in the living room when I was in my room or bathroom. But, like, now it's in there, and it's loud enough to hear when I'm getting showering up or just getting ready. So I just have, like, music. I can just come in my apartment and just tap either one, and then they both start playing. They're synced. And then it's just, like, it's awesome because I can hear it everywhere in my apartment. I mean, it makes me feel much richer than, much more wealthy than I am.
I was going to say, HomePod in the bathroom is, that's how you know you've made it.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really cool, though. I want to get, like, maybe one more for the bedroom, but it's just so nice to be able to just tap it, and then you just got music in the whole house. Yeah. And then, like, when you want to stop it, you can just tap on your phone or whatever. It's just awesome. I love it. It's $100 too, and it sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. Man, 63 degrees. I can't see straight, but is it beer 30?
Yeah.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited for the weather. Although, man, I've been snowboarding a lot this year, and it's like, I don't know why I took a couple years off of that, because it makes the winter so much better.
Yeah.
It's like something to actually look forward to. I'm actually sad thinking about the season ending,
Wow, I do not feel bad for you at all. I can't wait for winter to be over. I can't wait for it to be summer.
Yeah. It's really nice. I mean, I don't get a ton of, like, window light in my apartment, so I can tell as soon as I wake up and come out if it's, like, nice out, and it's great. It's a great feeling. The trees are going to start filling in, so I can't see my neighbors' windows as much anymore.
Can walk around naked.
Yep. Well, I do that anyways. But now no one will get a free show.
Right.
But yeah, man, it was like, well, we had like a fake, my friend was saying that there's like this like whole fake seasons in New York thing. And it always happens in March when everyone thinks it's like spring, and it's not for like another like 40 days.
Yeah.
And it's like weeks like this, and then it's going to get cold again. But we had like a 52-degree day last Wednesday. I went for a run by the water. Oh man, it is so nice.
Yeah. Man, March is great. March is great. You can like see the summer coming.
Totally. I agree. I like it. Much better than like January and February too.
Yep.
Cool, man. We're back in the mics. Been a little inconsistent this year compared to what we were wanting to do, but we love doing the show. We're going to keep doing it and try our hardest to do it every week. But if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sam.
I'm Ryan.
And we like to just talk about whatever we're working on. So what have we been working on?
Oh man, lots of stuff.
We do have a lot of stuff.
I guess I can kick us off. I've been working on a library that my applications are going to consume. And I've talked about
my
this.
Applications.
Yeah, and your applications. It does stuff like it handles auth. It sets up GraphQL for you. It launches like a Sura instance. The library piece of it, though, is how you integrate, like how you talk to your Sura instance. You need a GraphQL client. You need like a use auth hook to get the user. So that's what this library provides. And I've been using TSDX to write this. I got to say, the development experience has been, I've loved it. It's been phenomenal.
That's awesome.
I can write the library in, its own VS Code window, and then I'll tab to my application and just develop both side by side at the same time. And like the rebuilds are fast enough where I don't really notice that I'm working on like two different code bases with two different build tools. And also too, it's really easy to set up. So yeah, just want to say that absolutely loving TSDX.
That's cool. I haven't been doing a ton of open source like in the last probably like 5 months or something. And we were talking about this earlier, and it's just interesting. Like the last time I was doing open source a lot, and we were setting up Mirage and all these new apps and stuff, we were just doing it by hand.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's nice to not have to ever go back to that world.
Yeah. Man, there's so much like that TSDX does for you. I'm using this. Jared Palmer put together this template. It's like a template repository. Have you ever seen these? They're like repositories that are made for you to like fork and then start using on your own.
So kind of like a like the boilerplates that they used to give for
yeah,
projects?
yeah, like a boilerplate. Exactly. So it's not something like you install and your build tool sets up. You like literally fork this repository and then you just start editing it and that's it. So he has a boilerplate set up for monorepo that uses TSDX. And so...
Oh, cool. And it just comes with like your library and then like your other library?
Exactly.
Oh, cool.
There's like one that's like your React library and then the other that's like your utils library. And then you just edit it to name it what you want and you can add more or less.
Nice.
But man, the whole process is great. Like Lerna takes care of, installing and linking all your dependencies between, every project in your monorepo. TSDX, has roll up and TypeScript under its hood. And
Babel.
I actually don't know. I guess, right? Everything uses Babel. I don't know.
Right.
The things that I've seen are TypeScript and roll up.
Got you.
Under its hood to do all the building. And then the release process is really cool. There's a library called change sets, which I've never even heard of before this.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
The way it works is when you're ready to release, you run this change set command. You can do like change sets versions, and then that's going to pull up all the repos in your monorepo, all the libraries in your monorepo. And it's going to say which versions do you want to bump, which of these are patch releases, which of these are, what are the other ones, major, minor. And cool. I think it can detect changes and stuff like that. So it can't tell you like, oh, this is a major, this is a minor, but I think it can detect like, oh, you've edited code here.
Oh, cool.
So you do that, and it creates a bunch of files on disk that is basically like, okay, what is this change? They're markdown files. And you go and open them, and you describe the change for each of your libraries in the markdown files. So it'd say like, oh, you bumped your utils library to a patch release. Describe the change. You bump this one to a minor release. Describe the change. So you do that, and then you push it to GitHub. And then this is all like TSDX, like magic under the hood. TSDX comes with a bunch of GitHub actions that then read in these change sets. Also, too, like there's like, this is part of change sets too. I'm just going to kind of blur the lines. But a GitHub action runs that sees these, and then the GitHub action through change sets opens another PR that's like okay, here's your new version. And so it's all the docs you just wrote compiled into a change log.
What?
It's the npm versions themselves bumped.
What?
And then when you merge that PR,
there's an action that publishes on npm.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So it's really cool. So I was thinking about this. I was like, there's a ton of ways to use GitHub Actions to release software. Like with us, we would do like a tag. And then as soon as you push a tag to npm, as soon as you push a tag to GitHub, we would then publish that tag to npm.
GitHub Action would build.
Yep.
And then publish the dist to npm.
Yeah. This doesn't happen until you basically merge your work into master, and then those change set files exist as part of like your PR. So let me back up a little here. Let's say you're working on adding a feature. You would add the feature in your own PR. So you'd open a PR that's like adding new feature to my app, and you would describe the changes in that PR. And then that would get merged into master. And then GitHub Actions would see there's changes merged into master. So it would open another PR to do the release. So then like I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, this is usually different than our workflow, because like our workflow, if it's in master, there's a version of it that's published. So with this one, there's like some lag. But then I was like, this doesn't like...
Wait, is that true?
Yeah, because you could open... Sorry, is that true? In this process I'm describing?
No, when you said in our process, if there's something in master, then it's definitely published. But that's not true for the head.
Right, because we don't publish until we make a tag.
Right.
Okay, so I guess this is the same thing then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lag between a feature getting in and when it's published.
And when a tag exists, yeah.
And when a tag exists, yeah.
I had this thought that like, anyway, going back to this original thing, that like there's so many ways to manage your releases and your publishing. But at the end of the day, it's freaking great.
Yeah.
That this is just all built into this framework, and I don't have to think about it. And I don't really care about publishing
if it
tags.
aligned with your right. If it aligned with the way you happen to do it before.
Yeah. The fact that I just get a PR from change sets that says, okay, merge this and a new version will be published. By the way, also too, like, dude, just managing the changelog. And then the changelog shows up as a text in the PR. It's like you can't miss anything when you use this process.
I have a 45-minute video on YouTube. That's like how I release OSS software, because I was having someone take over an old project of mine, and it's just a pain in the butt.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah, I was really impressed.
And TSDX is not React. It doesn't have to be React. It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't. However, there is the examples are all like React libraries, and it does give you like a playground. So one of the things that scaffolds is like a playground that basically shows it mounting your React component, and then it gives you some like default tests. It's like render a React component and then expect true to be true, stuff like that. So I think it largely is used with React projects.
I wonder if like Svelte library developers are using TSDX,
Yeah.
Or if they're doing something else.
Yeah. I have no idea.
But I love seeing the general tools and stuff,
Yeah.
It's like the docs stuff. Like we worked on the Ember Docs add-on, and I've seen this Docusource thing pop up more and more. Like I think Relage has a new site that just came out, and I noticed it looked a lot like the other sites I've seen. It's like built with Docusource. So it's cool that stuff is being worked on and shared,
Yeah.
The boundaries are getting clearer,
That's one thing that I would absolutely love is a doc site that could like, I love just like build the API docs for me. Yes. Give me some markdown to write stuff. Right,
because it's almost within scope of TSDX, since if you're developing something, you need to document it.
Yeah. By the way, on that topic, another thing I've been doing is I've been kind of documenting these libraries and services as I've been building them, and I've been using like the Apple Notes app to not like write like end user docs, but to just take notes on like all the way all these things integrate. Like, I mean, just like in Hasura, you have like auth hooks, you have an admin secret, you have Postgres databases that you can need to connect to, Postgres usernames and passwords. So I've just been logging all that in an Apple Notes file, so I can reference like how all this stuff is built, and that file is getting pretty gnarly. lots of branching. Like, look at this. You have to set up this. Look at this.
Yeah.
Also, it's just not really great for like
technical writing.
Yeah, like code snippets and stuff like that. So I have this next app where like a lot of the stuff is being integrated. So I was like, I wonder what it would look like if I just jotted down some notes in MDX. So I don't know. I heard Next works well with MDX. A lot of people that write Next apps are using it for blogs, and there's tons of MDX integration examples out there. So I did that, and it's awesome, man. I have like markdown files where I write these notes in, and one of the problems with writing markdown files and then getting them to display is always like you have to write a bunch of CSS to get like, the markdown renderer is just going to transform markdown into HTML, but then you have to style it. But there's a Tailwind typography library, and it gives you a class called Prose, and you wrap your markdown in that class, and just boom.
Looks great.
Everything's just styled. It looks beautiful.
That's awesome.
So that, writing markdown, getting beautiful docs, and then MDX. So much you can do with MDX. MDX gives you a component that maps to a tag in Markdown. So you can say, like, when I encounter like a paragraph, render like a p tag, but you can also map it to a component. So render like my component that renders, I don't know, a div and then a p tag, something like that. So I have all these tokens, like, production URL, staging URL, password, and I just create all these tokens, and I have a component that just says, like, when I see __ staging URL, replace it with this URL. When I see __ app name, replace it with this name. And so then I can just write my docs as like kind of like, like abstract notes of how this all works. But then when I actually want to see like, oh, what is like the Postgres connection string? It's not like a string that's like, dollar username $dollar password @host. Like the MDX file completes everything for me. And so it's amazing that I can get like the actual, like, there's a difference between like reading and writing these docs, right? Like writing, I just want to like write down all these notes, but then reading, I actually want to see, like, I don't want to have to do a bunch of math and back tracing to figure it out. So that's one thing that's been, it's been awesome. It's been really fun.
That's really cool. I wanted to do a lot more with the Mirage site with the docs, because there's lots of opportunities for like interactive examples and making cool MDX components.
Yep.
Where you can just set up a server and see it in a little playground. But yeah, MDX is awesome.
Yeah. It's really, it's really easy. That's how
and then where have you published them?
Yeah, I have them in a Next app and I'm pushing it, but it's like, it's not
just
like
a Vercel URL or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it reads in a bunch of configuration. So it's not something I'd want to make public because it just has a bunch of like, configuration, like admin keys and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is some future where, there is like a publishable version of this.
Right.
So
right. And an easy way to get it. I liked how GitHub always gave you, when you use GitHub Pages, they gave you a nice URL that mapped to your repository. And so you didn't have to worry about, because I'm guessing with Vercel, there's no easy way to, like, you just get one of those random URL strings, right? Or I guess you choose your project name.
Yeah, you choose your project name. Yep.
But it's like .vercel.com, which is, I guess is fine.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I haven't gotten to that
level
yet. Yeah. This is just more like,
you want to see it for yourself and try it out and stuff.
See it for myself. Don't want to look at tons of like variable names and Apple Notes. Want nice code formatting. Oh, that's the other thing is like, dude, the like MDX and React Prism just like work perfectly together. React Prism is like a syntax highlighter for MDX. So code samples just look like code. They look like code from your editor.
And it wasn't a pain to import a bunch of CSS and all this file script tag to load the themes or something.
I think that I might be loading like 30 different languages or like 150 different languages that I'll never use, but I also don't care because the page is super fast and it shows my docs.
Nice. That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, I'm using your next S3 upload. I've finally gotten the dang image cropper. It's funny, like 6 months ago when I was like, I'll add progress pictures as my fitness app. Thought it was gonna be done in a week, but turned into a YouTube series and there's just so much going on. But I'm excited about it because there's some other gesture based stuff that I want to add to some apps. But the actual image cropper is finally like working and the math is all right and everything. So I wired it back up to your next S3 upload stuff, and it's awesome, man. It's so awesome.
Nice.
So that'd be fun to make a little quick video on that integration because it's really fast. I mean, I could make it should probably be like a 3 or 4 minute video, but it's just cool to show it off.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's fun. And then, so the other one you've been working on is the auth stuff.
Yep. Yeah. The auth stuff is more, the next S3 upload, it's like you bring your own bucket, you bring your own S3 keys. The auth stuff is more of like a centralized service that sets up everything for you.
Right. And you got to actually use it in a new app?
Yeah. Yeah. And it
app
worked for editing this podcast. Keeping notes on this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked.
That's awesome.
Unbelievable.
That's really cool. You just go to the UI and you create an app and then you get a key and then you put in your environment and then you get like a use auth hook and that's basically...
Yeah, you don't even have to put anything in your environment. You get a React. So you go to this service, you create a new app, and it gives you basically an identifier, an app name. And then there's a React. This is like where the monorepo that I was talking about earlier comes in. You install the monorepo. You install the library.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a monorepo, but you don't care about that. You install the library, and you import a provider from the library, and you give the provider the name of the application, the identifier.
Which is public.
Yeah, which is public. The name of your application, the identifier from your application. And then now this thing knows how to get all your users, how to log in users, how to do GraphQL queries. And you can bring your own, you don't have to I'm not like giving you like a GraphQL client. You bring your own GraphQL client. So you use Apollo.
Now, how do you create a user?
So when you install this library, you get a create user. You get a useauth hook, and useauth returns a create user function. And
But doesn't that need to be protected?
no, I mean I can go to GitHub right now and I can create a user.
Oh yeah.
So there's no I have
Yeah.
one of the things that that was fun to do this, and this is where like all the integrations come in. There are times where you're building a project and you don't want to have anyone sign up. So if you and I were building like a podcast editor, I don't want to have just anyone sign up. That's just for you and I.
Right.
So one of the things with this library is you can disable user signups.
Gotcha.
And you can only add users from like an admin interface.
Right.
So for our like podcast editor, that's the case.
That's what we'll do. Yeah. That's awesome.
And so when you try to create a user, you just get back an error that says like, user creation is not allowed for this project.
Very cool. Wow. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I want to try that out for sure.
Yeah. We should pair on it because I love when you get to test drive these things because it's like, oh yeah, maybe we should document how this works.
The last time it worked out really well, actually.
Nice.
Cool, man. We did run into something interesting that we talked about with regards to, what was it, the auth library? The Apollo stuff?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit because I thought it was pretty interesting. I think we can summarize it. I mean, we spent a long time talking about it, but now that I think we understand the problem.
Yeah. So
You're like, I'm never getting that year of my life back it sucked for me.
Yeah. So I mean, what's the best way to like kick this off? Like, I think it's developing libraries is really hard because you have to link them to the app you're working on.
I mean, the more interesting point, really, just to set the stage, is that we ran into an issue where there was some code in an app. It was setting up an Apollo context provider, and then it had some code that was feeding into the UI. And you copy and pasted the code that was setting up the provider, moved it into the library, imported it from the library. It was all the same code. And then when you wrapped your app with the provider that was being imported, instead of the code being right there, it broke.
Yes.
And, it really is not much to do with, it's the mono repo isn't important. It's the fact that the import paths kind of changed. And it, from the developer's perspective of working on this, it felt like one of those like referential transparency things, because you just literally copy and pasted the code from one file to another and imported it. Like, that's at a basic level, that should be something that doesn't change the behavior ever.
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah.
But what we discovered was that because the code you cut and pasted was itself importing stuff from Apollo, and the stuff you were importing from Apollo stored some state on its module scope, now that you had this code spread across 2 modules instead of 1, broke the code. So that was pretty nuts in my opinion.
Yeah. So when the code was in the application, it was importing the Apollo from the application's node modules, and that's where it was storing the state. That's a module it was storing its state on, and we cut and pasted it to the library. Yeah. Now it was storing the state on the library's version of Apollo.
Right.
So that means any code in the application that was referencing Apollo had no state. So It was like working before, and then when we moved it out, it was no longer working. And the referential transparency, that's exactly what I would think. It's like all I'm doing is moving a function from one file to another.
Yeah. And so the problem is that the app was still importing functions from Apollo and stuff from Apollo. And so your mental model might be like, if I have import, cache from Apollo, from string at Apollo / cache, it's like an identifier. And then you have some other code that's like import client from at Apollo / what client. And, you have your package JSON there. Those are both going to resolve to the same thing. But because of the way NPM works, they don't, we've talked about this in the show before, but like both NPM and Yarn, when you install things, Yarn kind of tries to deduplicate things. But the reality is you have like a tree. Your dependency graph is like a tree. And, like we were talking about, by design, NPM lets you have different versions of the same dependency, because the idea there being that they don't ever, they never cross streams with each other. And so the code runs at you as you traverse the code path, you get in deeper, and it's just using its little Lodash function. It doesn't matter if that thing is using Lodash 3 and then this other module is using Lodash 4. But in this case, it does because, well, A, when we run browser code, we're running it in a single environment with a single global context. And then B, like we were saying, the Apollo stuff stores things on the module state. So, you can do that. Like, this is the way SWR works. When you import SWR, it has a reference to this cache object, which is just a JavaScript object. Let cache equal open close bracket. And that's not in React. It's not in anything. It's just in the file. And so that's what's called module scope. And in the browser slots every file into a module map, and then it's always the same thing. But in this case, it didn't work because of the way that your library had Apollo as a dependency, your app had Apollo as a dependency, and those happen to resolve to different versions, different modules, basically. And so the things that were being done to the module scope in your library weren't translating over. So that was just that is what took us a while to figure out why that was going on, because and that's like it's kind of back to this idea of like global scope and dependency injection, where it's a good idea. Dependency injection is nice because it gives you that seam. It's all the same. It's all kind of related. It's the same idea of like why at least in Ember, you were kind of discouraged from using module scope for this very reason, because even if you didn't have this issue of splitting your code across libraries and applications, you would sometimes want to split your code and use it in an app or use it in a test. So as soon as you have like a second consumer of it, you want that nice seam where you can inject the dependencies instead of just having an assumption about what global scope you're running in,
Yeah. A thought I had here is like, listen, in JavaScript and in Node, like module scope gets used for data storage. Like it does.
It's a fact of life.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can even say it's like a bad design pattern, but think about how React context works. Like React context is you store it in module scope and you export it and things import it. So you can't.
Right. You're creating you're calling create context outside of the context. You're calling create context outside of the scope of a React application.
Correct. And your module scope is how your things that want the context get it. So there's state stored on modules in JavaScript. Like you can't say that doesn't exist. I was thinking like, okay, and then you have like JavaScript node resolution algorithm that like require React or require Apollo doesn't always require the same React. Like Node's module resolution is going to tell you which module it returns. And that becomes a problem if you have state that you're expecting to be on that module, because one thing requiring React and another thing requiring React could get two totally different Reacts.
Yeah.
And
that happens common enough. React actually has a warning message about it.
Yeah. Your whole React app blows up when you try to do this.
Yeah.
Or if you get in this spot. And so I was thinking like, okay, so using require paths is not like, that's what we're using to key our state, right? That we're using that as like a lookup for the state we want to store in module scope. And it's not enough. I was thinking like, would a language that had built-in dependency injection, like, would that be like good here? Like, would that solve this problem? Because in a way, we're basically using module names as a way to store state. Isn't that kind of what dependency injection is? Like, isn't dependency injection, we're coming up with a name for something and then we're storing state on it, and then they invert, inversion of control, where now you have like a thing that's responsible for creating the thing. So it's a little more than just import, export, but
I think you're onto something. But I think the problem is the key is not enough information. So when you import something from React string, you're not actually able to specify as much information as you want, because it's really that string plus what's in your package JSON plus what's in the package JSON of your dependencies, and in the specific way node resolution is going to work itself out. That is all the information needed to determine where that thing is going to end up.
Also, what's in your node modules folder? because you can have stuff in your node modules folder. It might not be in your package JSON, and it will still resolve to that thing in the node module. So it's
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, so we were talking about this too, and I think Deno tries to solve this. I remember Ryan Dahl right? Is it?
Yep.
Talking about like his regrets with Node and npm, and this was one of them, that the module specifier that you import or require from should have had an extension, and it should have just been a pointer to basically a file. And I think that's how Deno does it, and I think it does solve some of these issues. The other thing is, like, my question was going to be like, did this ever happen in Ruby? Was this ever a problem?
Well, I was thinking about this in Ruby, and so in Ruby you don't store state in modules. Instead, you import modules, and those modules just run. And those modules, when they run, Ruby doesn't.
But what if you had a module that just said print, puts hello? Like, how many times in multiple files import that? Use that or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that going to get run multiple times? Could it be different versions of it?
There's a few ways to require files. I think there's a load, and when you call load, that's going to run the code every time. That's like I think that's supposed to be like inline this code. There's also require, which I think will say, well, this thing has already been run. I don't need to run it again, because like the idea in Ruby is when you import something, when you require something, you're modifying like global scope, and so like you're adding a class to the global. And so when you require something, you don't need to require it again because it's already been added. So,
and that's how npm works, right? There's like a module cache where once you require something, if that same thing is required, it's not going to parse and execute again. So you wouldn't see a console log twice, let's say.
Right. But in Ruby, you can't do like let x equals, sorry, there's no let in Ruby, but x equals require something, and then x dot cache equals 1, 2, 3. I don't know if I've never seen that. I don't think you can do that in Ruby.
Yeah. But I think in a typical Ruby project, like a Rails project that uses bundler, you're not going to have the problem where you have multiple versions being resolved. It might even, does it warn you?
Well, yeah, bundler won't let you
Bundler
won't let you install it. It'll say like, look, like these dependencies, you need 2 different versions of Rails. Can't do that.
You have to deal with it.
Right. This is like, there's like a dependency mismatch here. But also in Ruby, the way you would like, even if you imported 2 different files that both create a class, those files then add that class to global scope. So the way that you would like do caching or sharing information is you would just append information onto that class. I'm using class example. It's just any object, right? But you would add information to that class, and then like both requires might get different code. But still that's going to be the same class in like Ruby's global scope. So here's a better way to describe what I just said. Let's say I have like a.rb and then b.rb. So 2 Ruby files, and they both define a class. We'll call it person. So if I require a, that defines this new person class in my global scope, and then I require b, that defines a new person, that defines person class in my global scope, which is already there. So those 2 things basically get merged. So files that require A and B can like communicate because they both have this person class that they can modify.
Got you.
Where in Node, you get back a different object. It's a module from everything you require. And you might be requiring React in 2 different spots, but those might be 2 different modules. And so you can't share state across that module. And that's where this problem comes in.
Right.
Did that make sense? I feel like I just did not do very...
It did. No, it did make sense. I think the follow-up question is, what if the 2 things happen to resolve to the same version of React? Would it matter?
I think it does not matter. I think that's still 2 different modules. It's like literally 2 different objects that wrap 2 different... A module in Node is like it's a thing that wraps the code, and you would just...
So it has its own scope.
Wrappers. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah. Oof, tough. So anyways, the solution was to use npm link, which typically people are introduced to when they are developing a library and they want to test it out in their app without having to go through and build it and restart everything. So you npm link it from your app. You say npm link my library, so that way your app is pointing to the thing that you're working on disk. So if you make a change to the library, you can see it in your app. In this case, you do what you call reverse npm linking, but it's another feature of the npm link command, which you run in the library to make its React version resolve to the same React version from the app, which is what happens in production if someone were to just install. So someone who's using your library is never going to run into this. It was about your development setup and getting it to more faithfully reproduce the kind of environment someone would see if they were using your library in a real situation.
Yeah, exactly. When you're developing the library, you do, yarn install, and you get all that project's dependencies, dev dependencies, peer dependencies installed. But when you're consuming that library and you yarn install it, you only get that project's dependencies installed. And so that project's not going to bring along its own React. Instead, it's going to say, I have a peer dependency on React I expect to be used in a React app, but I don't need to install React myself.
Right.
And that's where the funniness comes from.
Right. And then just briefly, we kind of talked about what we would love to see here. Ideally, I guess if you're developing a library that has a peer dependency on React, it'd be nice if the system or the tooling could set you up with a development environment where you have to basically tell it. It doesn't let you just install your own version from package.json, from the library's package.json. It's like you have to point to it somehow.
Yeah, it's like I'm using
but peer dependencies are not really well supported right now. Well, I heard npm 7 they're installed automatically or enforced or something like that.
Yeah,
but not in Yarn, and we use Yarn. But maybe I'd be interested to see what the behavior is like in the latest npm version. I'm not sure if it would help in this area.
Yeah, I don't think it would, because it's when I'm developing my library, I'm like in VS Code working on my library. My library doesn't know am I just running on my own with my own build tool, or am I being consumed by another host app? Because my dependencies should change in those situations. Like if I'm running on my own, I need all my dev dependencies,
test runner,
all that stuff. I think ideally, and this creates 50 more problems, but I would want 2 node modules folders. One, that this is when I'm linked to another project.
Mm-hmm.
These are the node modules that I bring along with me.
That's interesting. So like if I'm being imported by an app, then I'm going to delegate my peer dependencies to that app.
Yes. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
If I'm doing development myself, here's my node modules folder with all the node modules, like my build tool and my Babel and all that stuff. So
interesting. Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Reasonable.
What could go wrong? Listen, everyone. My plan is to create another node modules directory. It's gonna be fine.
You're gonna have to update that meme where it's like the black hole, the heaviest thing in the universe, and then it's like 2 node modules directories.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you got it working, and now you're actually getting back to doing the fun stuff.
Yeah. That is true.
Yeah. Nice. All right, let's jump into the segment. This week's segment, tweet of the week.
Nice.
I think you got one, and I think I got one too.
Yep.
So why don't I go? You've been talking for a little bit. I had no idea if this is going to be interesting, but I just saw this. Pete Hunt, Floydophone on Twitter. He said, literally never ever use Redux on a new project under any circumstances, even if it's what the team knows. I thought that was pretty spicy. I've never used Redux, actually. I mean, I've gone through the tutorial. I understand. I've watched talks on it, but I've never used it. Yeah. And I actually like that it's if it goes the way of the dodo in the next year or two, it's pretty nice. It's nice to just skip over things. Maybe that's me getting older, but like I never learned how to write a Webpack config, and I didn't have to until Next started doing it for me. So now I still don't have to. Pretty sweet. So if I don't ever have to use Redux, that's pretty nice.
I think there's different levels of using Redux. I think there is using Redux on your own, and then using Redux on a big app where a lot of developers are using it.
Yeah.
So I've never used it on a big app. And in fact, the only times I've used it are a little toy. I want to learn this.
Yeah.
I liked, there's somewhere in this giant tweet thread that says why. And I think he gives, some pretty good reasoning. I'm trying to find it, but I think it's very easy. So I think it's very easy to shit on Redux and basically come up with the example of, someone's storing checkbox state in Redux.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's fair. That's not like putting like the best argument of why you should use Redux forward.
Right. It's not. But when people did start coming out and using Redux, they were putting everything in there, and they're like, that's how it works best. I mean, you could just see it. You could just see, if you've been in the industry long enough, you know these waves, and people were just going crazy for it.
Oh, yeah.
And putting everything in there, and it works best when you do that and everything. I remember talking to people at a conference about that.
Yep.
So I think that's probably a big part of what he's pushing against. But he has a follow-up tweet here which says most projects are served just fine with context, hooks, and something like use SWR. Beyond that, you should look at something like Relay. But yeah, I do think there is definitely a need for a smoother path when you, when you start off hacking in React and you have your actions, like your functions, which are the handlers for your events, and you're just writing them right in the render function,
yep.
In the body of the component, and they're all closing over the local state, and it works really great, and it's awesome for prototyping. And then, a week into the project, you look at your component, and it's 5 functions, which are like 8 or 10 lines. And then you scroll down and you see the render. I mean, it's still great, but there should be a nice smooth thing where, okay, I can pull these out, still share the scope, the state somehow, but organize them a little bit better. So, I'd be interested in seeing like what that looks like in all the different approaches that are possible.
Yeah, you'll never.
And like I've done use reducer before. We did XState. XState felt like a bigger change just because it's a bigger change. The code doesn't look very similar. It doesn't look it looks too different from the code you write just doing the normal basic React stuff, that I'd like to see something that's like a little bit smoother, I guess. Mm-hmm. Even pulling the functions out of the body, and just having them at the bottom of the file would be a nice step. And I guess with a reducer you can do that, but wouldn't you need like a higher order function so that you call it passing in the state, so that the action creator, that like the actual actions get the state, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if you need, you can pull your functions out, but if they need access to the state, well,
they definitely need access to the state. I mean, if they don't, then you're not doing it right, right?
The beauty of React is you just write a function that closes over state, and it just rebuilds that function every time. So
exactly,
it's like, why move it?
Exactly. Out? I don't think I realized how many problems that particular thing that you just described solves until you do it, and you realize it's like a whole layer of plumbing that you just sidestep. You have an effect that is just referencing some piece of state, and it's like boom. Even though you're 2 function or 3 function scopes deep, you still have a reference to that via a closure, and that's it. You don't have to pass it along. You don't have to figure out how am I going to get it. So that's really cool.
By the way, just to add on to this tweet, someone says, okay, I'll bite. Why don't you want to use Redux? And his response is, it's fine to always express a state machine, but plain state machines don't really help you with common problems. And today it's much easier to express plain state machines in modern React. So
use reducer or just
or even
state, like
use reducer. Reuse reducer is a pretty good example here.
Yep.
And then most of the time you need to do something based on fetching data from the server. Redux Saga, and Redux Thunk are the 2 most popular ways to do it, but they require so much code and direction, and it still doesn't help you with many of the types of race conditions. So I thought this was
a thoughtful response.
Yeah, like this is fair. Like by the time it does help you, you end up installing these libraries that are so complicated. And actually, you know what? This is like kind of my experience with XState. I know XState, like XState definitely solved our problem, but wow, like we had to spend some time learning this whole new library.
Yep. I like the way it forces us to think about it, but then when you look at the code, is it what you want to necessarily see?
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. All right, what's your tweet of the week?
Mine is, feature flags are a great way to decouple your release and your deployment and reduce the blast radius. Whether you build or buy, consider a solution that is centralized and does not require deployment to toggle the flag. So I thought this was a just awesome tweet. First of all, I love anyone that describes anything in DevOps and then says reduce the blast radius, because that's exactly what it is when something goes wrong.
I know, that's great word.
So this is talking about, and this is something I've been thinking about a ton lately, especially with all the services we use, which is a whole nother episode topic. But release and deployment we think of as like the same thing, right? like we think of as I'm pushing code to GitHub and it gets deployed and it's a release.
And it feels like a big deal. It's like, oh, are we going to release this? Are we going to deploy it? It always feels like there's a lot of things, and software shouldn't really feel like that ideally.
Yeah. So if you can just deploy and you deploy your code and then the release is toggling a feature flag.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If you deploy your code and everything works, like, okay, great. Your deployment was successful. And then if you toggle feature flag to do the release and something goes wrong, well, the rollback is you just flip that feature flag back and you're right back to the state you were before. Now, I this definitely adds complexity. Like you have two code paths in your app. Anytime you have a feature flag, you have, an if and an else statement around that flag. You also, like, sometimes features are really big that require like database migrations. So you're basically have a database table that's like supporting two versions of itself. And we've done this before. And it's not as simple as just having a migration that runs when you have a deployment and a release. So I definitely going to acknowledge that. But I think I really like that feature flags are the thing that gets at teasing deployment apart from release. Right. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that, it's not an obvious way to solve that problem. So the first time you hear about it, it's pretty cool,
Yeah, if you ask me why would you use feature flags, I would have said something like, I want to show my power users a feature before I roll it out. Exactly. I would look at it from a product point of view.
Yep.
Not from
as a way to solve a technical problem, right?
And it really is. I mean, it's really impressive. So
that's really cool. Very cool. Cool. Let's wrap it up. I'll just talk about this Egghead course I've been working on. I'm working on probably going to be about a dozen videos. Maybe we'll see how it goes at the end. That probably means it's going to be more like 16 or 18, but
64.
Right. A year. We're doing a Tailwind course for Egghead, and it's going to be a fun one where we build a Discord clone. So I just had a meeting about it today, and I'm getting pretty excited about it actually. So you and I worked on the Discord clone like a week or two ago, and just got pretty far with it just in one session, really, one or two sessions. And it's basically going to be teaching kind of the fundamentals of Tailwind, but through building a Discord clone. And so, Adam and Simon from Tailwind Labs have their videos going over on YouTube, and they just released a cool course where you kind of learn Tailwind, going feature by feature. And so just to kind of mix it up and keep, all the Tailwind content interesting, we're kind of taking the opposite approach, because this is more like, okay, I'm ready to build an app. How would I use Tailwind to do that? And so we're going to build the app together, learning Tailwind as we go. So that's going to be something I'm working on, and going to try to share and work in public as best as I can. But it's fun. It was fun talking with the folks at Egghead about how to break it up and where the sticking points are, where the stumbling blocks with people learning Tailwind, and just thinking back about like how much we've learned since we learned Tailwind. Like, the stuff with Flexbox, so much of the stuff with Tailwind is just that it's just CSS. And so if there's something you can't do, it's a common thing for people to be frustrated when they first get to it, because they're like, I came from Bootstrap, right? And Bootstrap had like an answer for everything. Like they give me headings and colors, and they give me forms, and they give me buttons and stuff. And then you use Bootstrap and you get frustrated by it, and it's you don't really know why. So you get frustrated because you try to change things and it's hard to change. But if you remember first using Bootstrap, I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah. Like
panels and wells and accordions, lists, and like you do so little and you get so much, right? Mm-hmm. So then you come to something like Tailwind, and it's hard to understand right away what problem it's solving and what its responsibility is and what the scope of the tool is, because it's different than Bootstrap. Even though they're obviously trying to solve the same thing. They're trying to help you design your app with CSS and write maintainable code, right? Mm-hmm. But with Tailwind, you don't get a button, but you get over that pretty quick. You can build a button pretty easily. But, you don't have these layout primitives like, well, now we have grid, but you don't have columns and all these higher level things. And people are like, if Tailwind's supposed to be better, or like I'm learning this for the first time, like, then give me the stuff I liked about Bootstrap, right? It's like, give me the button class. Give me,
give me a
the
Bootstrap
panel
that's easy for me to change, because that was my problem.
Exactly. Give me a modal. Like, Bootstrap has a dang modal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's never going to be a modal in Tailwind ever. But the modal in Bootstrap is awesome, and it looked great, and it animated. Like, and you only put like 3 lines of code in or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm just trying to put myself in that beginner shoe, and you're like, why doesn't it have the stuff I like about it? But the way I'm thinking about this now, and we talked about this maybe like a month ago, and I heard this podcast talking about it as well. It was like talking about the state of CSS survey and why so many people seem to both hate and love CSS.
Yep.
And I think there's a couple of things going on here. And the main way I'm thinking about it now is that you have like the actual low level API of CSS, which is like font -size : 16 pixels. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. You can't really improve upon that. Like, you can't really improve upon that. That's like, it's very declarative. It's very easy and obvious. No one has a complaint about the word choice, or, there are low level complaints with how like the rendering, the layout engine works and floats and confusing z-index stuff. Those are certain things, but most people, those are just not the main thing that people complain about when they say, I hate CSS. At least that's one class of things that people complain about. But I think the larger thing that people complain about is the architecture and organization side of it, because no one has a problem writing font -size 16 pixels. Problem is when you come into a project and there's CSS files everywhere and you don't know what they do, because CSS on its own, while it gives you this nice declarative API that gives you ways to style things in a way that's just perfectly fine, it doesn't give you any guidance or opinions about how to structure and maintain your code. And, it reminds me a lot of how people used to talk about JavaScript like 10 years ago, or even 8 or 7 years ago, because people say, I hate JavaScript. And you say, well, why? And they say, well, there's not even modules in JavaScript. And it's almost the same thing. Like JavaScript back in the day, it was just one global scope, and you just have script tags. There's no dependency system. There's no modules at all. And so it wasn't as much with the problem of the fact that there was a function keyword instead of a fun keyword, or, the actual syntax was crappy or super verbose or just whatever. It wasn't that stuff. That was really the problem. The problem was when you look at a JavaScript application, it was a mess. It was just an absolute mess. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is for a lot of people's apps with their styles that they write. And even if you use something like SAS, which tries to help you solve this architecture and organization problem a little bit with primitives, or you use a framework like Materialize or Bootstrap, you still have a mess. And that, I think, is the responsibility of Tailwind. That is the reason for being for Tailwind, which is like to solve that. And it's funny because people look at Tailwind and say it's such a mess, but actually It's so much less messy, because you don't come into a Tailwind project and have all these hidden CSS files with rules that have no meaning to anyone anymore. And if you want to change something, you can. And then when it does come to the messiness part of Tailwind, where you get duplication and stuff, it's actually a really solid answer from Tailwind, which is like, you have better tools for organizing code based on the tool and framework you're using to build your app. So just use a React component or a Rails partial, and that's it. Yeah. We've solved all the other things of co-locating your styles with your code, so you can just keep it organized the way you're organizing the rest of your code.
Dave, if you make a list of something in HTML, it's friggin' messy. There's a lot of HTML elements that are duplicated across that list, but no one cares because we can create partials or components, and we have a list item.
It's actually a great point.
Yeah, I literally just thought of that. So
it's a really good point though. Like no one
ever says like HTML is crappy because of this.
Yeah. Yep, it's true. But like we have all these BEM schemes, and you're coming up with selector names to target different things. Like it's ridiculous. __info_info2. Never again. But it's really interesting, right? It's like thinking about it in this way, because it's like, yeah.
You mentioned that on one of the previous podcasts, and I remember when I was re-listening to that one and doing the edits and show notes, it was found myself nodding along and being like, I've never thought about this, and you're absolutely right. I guess my question here is like, can you, if this is a reason that you use Tailwind, and this is a reason that people like us love Tailwind, how do you explain this to someone that hasn't had that problem, right? Like, how do they have to go through with Bootstrap?
Well, I do think there is like there's some path here where it's like, you're at a point where you hate Bootstrap or you don't want to do that again because you feel it's too limiting or whatever, and you feel overriding it just always becomes a mess, which it does. So this is a way to solve that problem, and the reason it doesn't have a panel class or a modal class as part of it is because that introduces the problem again. So it's like defining the boundary and what problem we're trying to solve. We're solving the architecture side. We don't think that there's a problem. We don't think there's a fundamental problem with the styling side such that we need to provide you with an entirely new API. Actually, to be good with Tailwind, you have to be good with CSS. Yeah. And that's why I was thinking about this during my call today, where when you go back to 4 years ago or whatever, when you start learning Tailwind, hadn't had as much practice with Flex. I wouldn't think to inline an SVG and then wrap it in a Flex and do middle of line to get it to line up with the text. But now I do. But that's, if I ever was working on a project without Tailwind, I would now solve those problems the same way because I know what CSS tools I have at my disposal, and I would think about it exactly the same way. It's just that, when you learn how to do it in CSS and then you translate it to Tailwind, you're just solving the co-location and organizational problems. So it's kind of like if you're teaching someone how to do the layout for Discord with Tailwind and you get finished and they're like, I didn't really get that. What I would tell them to do is step out of Tailwind and go to a CodePen or go take a course on CSS Flexbox and just do it like there without anything else. So you are writing Flex align items and display Flex. Okay, I make this thing. And then you have all your CSS rules there and you're understanding how Flex grow works and Flex shrink works. And so you've learned it. And so now you come back to Tailwind and then you just realize you just get to apply them and that's it. So you don't have to go through any translation. You don't have to name anything. There's nothing else to do. And it just involves learning CSS.
That's a great tie back to how you started this, where you said it's Tailwind is just CSS.
Yeah.
And that's a great, going to CodePen and writing out the CSS is a really great way to show that.
Yeah. I also want to talk about this a little bit in the course too, just because I do feel like, Adam can be a little provocative at times, which I think is good because he kind of takes an opinion and takes a stand for it. But if I've seen people on Twitter, the first time you come to the Tailwind site and it's like CSS best practices don't actually work, someone can read that and think, oh, this person is like, shitting on CSS in some way. But if you think about these two things, what he's really saying is that the organizational architecture side, the best practices around there and around writing generic HTML that is targeted by specific CSS is the wrong way to think about it. And instead, you want to target specific HTML with generic CSS. So you want to flip the direction there. So that's what he's saying, but it's very easy to see some people who talk about Tailwind and the phraseology. And there's a lot of people who do already say things like CSS sucks, I hate CSS, I'm never going to be good at it. And then say, oh, okay, we're not on the same page. But Tailwind unabashedly takes a stance that CSS is a pillar of the web and it's not going anywhere. And learning it is going to be beneficial and help you out. And that is how you have to use Tailwind. Tailwind is an abstraction for people who know CSS. So you can't avoid it, learning CSS to use Tailwind. Yeah. You have to learn it. So yeah, just some interesting thoughts from the meeting. But I'm going to try to sprinkle in some of those conceptual points, throughout the videos. But most of the videos are going to be just, building out the clone. I think it's going to be fun.
That's so interesting because I just need to go back to what you just said. Bootstrap does try to fight CSS in the sense that you get class BTN or class modal.
I know.
So they're saying CSS is not good.
They're saying you don't need it. They're saying
not good. It's not.
Exactly. They're saying use something on top that, and when you tweak it, you change Sass variables in Bootstrap. You do this thing. You don't learn CSS and learn how to do it yourself. The forms are the same way. Whereas Tailwind forms is like, if you want to change this, you change it the way you would change a form if you weren't using Tailwind with just CSS.
Yep. Really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to say one more thing. Like, you might take away from this, like, if you want something like Bootstrap, then Tailwind is not a good choice because you have to like rebuild all that. But I'm an awful designer, and I use Tailwind with the Tailwind UI project that gives you all these things like modals and panels and buttons, and I think it looks beautiful, and they're also really easy to customize. They're really there's no more overriding CSS.
They don't concede the organizational benefits you get from using Tailwind in the first place. They embrace it.
So I find for someone like me that understands CSS and knows how to use Flexbox and Grid, but is also just atrocious at anything design related, that these two are just, I mean, they're amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool actually. Now thinking about how both projects exist, and then thinking about how I was just talking about the problems with CSS being the actual API, like font dash size colon, and learning how Flexbox works as like the lower level API part, and then all the BEM and object oriented CSS and all the other stuff as like a way to solve the organizational thing. Tailwind really solves the organizational thing, and then Tailwind UI really solves this other thing. So when people say, "Where's my panel?" or modal dialog, well, now you have an answer for that. Yep. And I think that's where it came from too, because that's what led to the creation of the project, because people were loving the problems that Tailwind solved, but it didn't have the same domain as and responsibilities that it was trying to take on as a Bootstrap did. Bootstrap's trying to make your modal for you. Tailwind doesn't. So enough people were like, all right, I get it, but I want my modal back. And so now you can get it. Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, but that'll be fun. So I'll try to be sharing in public as I go. Discord's fun because it has a mobile view to it, but it's similar to, the desktop view. So I think it'll be a good way to learn mobile and responsive design. But it's going to be able to share a lot of those components and make them work on smaller screens and bigger screens and all sorts of fun stuff. So, keep an eye out for that. My Twitter is probably where I'll be sharing most of that stuff, but hoping to start recording pretty soon, actually. So, should be fun.
Nice. We'll link your Twitter in the show notes, so
awesome.
People can follow along.
Cool. Yeah, I'm at Sam Selkoff on Twitter, and Ryan is at RyanTO.
Tweets.
So, Ryan
I did
TO
not
tweets.
Get that one. I was a late sign up for Twitter.
Yeah, I was too. I know. Some of the people I follow, they're like, sometimes post their tweets from like 2007 or something. I signed up like 2012, and then I didn't use it for like 6 years, or 5 years or something. I didn't understand it. I still think Twitter has a massive onboarding problem, but now they have Clubhouse cloned, so who knows? Maybe they'll get better in the next. The investors want something back now, so
we will see.
They just dropped like 6 features in the last month.
I know. Hey, the stock is at its all-time high.
Wow. Have you used any of them, by the way? Spaces or newsletters or Clubhouse thing?
So the Fleets thing I've used, and that has kind of been like a bomb. Even the people that are like the people that I think are really interesting that I follow. Yeah. There's 2 people that post things other than their tweets. So a lot of people just post their tweets as Fleets, and I'm like, okay, but I could just see this anyway.
They're just to get more attention.
It's just like it just feels like really just gimmicky. But there's 2 people that post. They get on the camera, they say interesting things, and so I was like, okay, they're like, I always click their things when I see them. And, gotcha. And there was I don't have access to the Clubhouse thing. I think it's called Spaces, but I will see it when people I follow start Spaces. And I joined one that someone I follow started, and there was like 300 people in there, and it was just like silent and weird. And so I think they were just like testing it out. I also really like Clubhouse.
Twitter's too technical. Clubhouse is like a cool kids party. Twitter is like an awkward developer hallway track where like everyone is introverted. It's like their first conference and no one knows how to talk to each other. Yeah. It's like, make sure you always leave a room for someone else to slot into. And then when someone else slots in there, the rest of you open up again to make sure there's always room. It's like teaching introverted nerds how to communicate and meet people.
I hope. I don't know. Also, too, there's like it's different experience on the web and on the phone, and I don't like that because I only think of like Twitter. I don't think of 2 different things. So,
but you're still in the Clubhouse?
yeah, I mean, Clubhouse it's amazing.
That's awesome.
If you're not on it, get on it. It's unbelievable. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's like it reminds me of conferences where you'd go grab like a drink after a conference and you'd have like an amazing conversation with like, 4 or 5 different people, and you don't even have to contribute that much.
Right.
That's Clubhouse.
That's awesome. Cool thing. All right. Let's wrap it up for the week, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Well, I'm going to be in Florida from Wednesday to Friday, so maybe, I think we could record early in the week.
Nice.
It is Tuesday after all. But, I'm going to Florida right when it gets 65
I was going to say, the weather gets nice, and you're like, okay, see ya.
But thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.